Good evening, everybody. Today is Thursday, September 4th. This is the Budget and Public Employees Committee, currently 6:09. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Sanye. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Velasquez.
Present.
Alderman Devotie. President Green.
Present.
Chair Aldrich.
Present.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Sanye. We have 5 present. We have quorum.
Thank you. With that, we have approved quorum, or made quorum. I would take a motion to approve the minutes from Wednesday, July 30th, 2025.
Second.
It was moved by the Alderman from the 5th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Sanye. Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Aye.
Alderman Devotie. Chair Aldrich.
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
We have 5 aye votes.
With that, we have approved the minutes from Wednesday, July 30th, 2025. We have no board bills for review, no resolutions. Before we jump to committee discussion, I'm going to jump down to excused members. Madam Clerk, please make note that Alderwoman Tyus is not excused and will be sending an email to the clerk to remove her from the committee since she's missed over 20 meetings of the Budget and Public Employees Committee.
Noted.
Thank you. With that, we will jump to committee discussions. Today, we will be talking about RAM's expenditures. The Board of Aldermen, just want to give kind of a little recap. So the Board of Aldermen passed a board bill that would allocate $30 million of RAM's fund to the tornado impacted area since we had the storm back on May the 16th. A important part of that legislation mentioned that on a monthly basis that this Budget and Public Employees Committee will meet to be able to discuss the expenditures of where those $30 million of RAM's funds are going to ensure that there is transparency. We recently know that there was a deadline that FEMA created for August 26th, where people no longer were able to fill out applications with FEMA. The Board of Aldermen, the Mayor's Office, and the President's Office, before that 26th deadline, sent a letter to the federal government asking for an extension of FEMA. We were granted originally an extension as we got closer towards that short window of 15 days or 16 days, which we asked for about 30. We sent another letter, the Board of Aldermen, the Mayor's Office, and the President's Office, asking for an additional extension, and we were not granted that extension from the federal government. This is an opportunity from the Budget and Public Employees Committee, but mainly for the community to make sure that there's transparency happening when it comes to the expenditures of RAM's dollars, and to ensure that those RAM's dollars, and to be clear, the Board of Aldermen allocated the $30 million that was just the interest. So that was not the principal amount of the RAM's dollar, but just the interest to start to get some dollars out the door. There has been some dollars that have went out the door via FEMA, as well as the state legislator, which are now in right now. Taking a side note, please call all your state reps and senators and tell them to stop the rigging of our maps and the initiative petition process, which the people have a voice, but they passed legislation about $100 million also to go to RAM's relief money. Again, this under the ordinance allows, more importantly, for the board to be able to hear directly in that board bill. We gave a lot of ability for the mayor's office to work with ENA, but to have input on how those funds were being spent out over the course of time until we get to zero of that $30 million. But Alderman Browning, who's the vice chair of this committee, offered an amendment that requires, again, the mayor's office to come in front of this committee so that the community can also know how those dollars are being spent. So today we will hear from Julian Nix from the mayor's office, who is He has a very long title, Chief Recovering Deputy Officer of Tornado Recovery Office, that will give an update on how those funds are being spent. But I also want to thank each and every one of you for coming out today. We want to make sure until those dollars are spent that we hold these meetings in the afternoon, because we know that people have real 9-to-5 jobs and can't necessarily make some of the committee meetings that we have during the daytime. And we want the community to know exactly where those dollars are going. So thank you to everybody who came out today. I do want to call up Mr. Julian Nix so that he can give a review of, since we last met, where some of those expenditures are going. I will say, as this committee continues to meet over the next few months, I think it is crucially important that the mayor's office, we received this document about 4 o'clock today. The month before that, we received it about 3:30. It is important for the committee to be able to get these documents ahead of time so that we can review them, so the public can see it, but also for our staff who has to put these documents online and also in a drive have an adequate time. So as we are trying to be transparent, I know they're working hard around the clock in the mayor's office. I will request when we have another meeting that we receive these documents at least 24 hours in advance so that committee members can be able to review them, as well as the public and our staff have enough time to put these documents online for the general public. So with that, I would move on and bring up Mr. Julian Nix from the mayor's office to give a presentation on expenditures since we last met on the Rams interest money, not the principal, that is designated to the tornado.
Is it green? Is the light
Just
green?
press that button.
All right, perfect. Well, first, thank you all for allowing me to be before you all again, presenting on broader progress. So if you want to simplify the name, Alderman Aldridge can just Chief Recovery Officer as a simplified form. But I did maybe want to start with just one general thing, because I know you mentioned the FEMA IA deadline, but one, people can still apply for late registration. So I do want to say that there is an option. Our encouragement for all who did not register in time for the deadline to treat it as if
Mr. Nix, if you can just talk, you may have to pull it up, talk a little bit into the mic so that everybody can hear you.
Is that
everybody.
better? Is that better?
That's better. And I'll turn the volume up, but
You can
yes.
even-
I might just grab it. That'll be easier. Perfect. So yeah, so what I was saying is for those who have not registered, maybe watching and are late registrations, they can still register for FEMA. FEMA is approving late registrations. And so we've encouraged everyone to go to a disaster recovery center or call the FEMA number if they did not register in time. And then the other aspect was, one is, while I recognize this committee was created mostly to focus on Rams interests, I do think that both for the public and for this committee as the Budget and Public Employees Committee, it's important we talk about the entire fiscal aspect of the recovery, which includes the overall spending well beyond Rams, as well as the cost recovery process. So if that's okay with this group, as we continue to come, we'd love to make sure we keep this group updated on the broader aspects of expenditures tied to the tornado response, including the Rams interest, but we'll always do a deep dive directly into the Rams interest amount. So I'll talk about a bit more of those areas during this meeting. And I'll also, Alderman Aldridge, we'll make sure these get out 24 hours in advance, kind of from now on. So that does give me to one broader update. I did want to introduce two members that are here from the recovery office or from our task forces. One is Jim Hill, who is our new Chief Finance and Cost Recovery Officer. So he will be dedicated fully to primarily focusing on finance and cost recovery efforts with FEMA tied to the city, and will be in the future helping drive a lot more of these kind of direct presentations and supporting that overall effort. And then I also wanted to acknowledge Dr. Adam Pearson from the Department of Human Services, who's also been integrally involved in our resident well-being task force and sits on the committee for part of the allocations that'll be here to answer some more specific questions when it ties to a subset of the Rams dollars. Perfect. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So if we go to the next page here. First, I know we shared this slide before, but just sharing a little bit again that we kind of have broken down the broader recovery effort into three phases. Really the response phase, which it was the first couple of months immediately following the tornado, the restoration phase, which is focused on a wide variety of topics, and then ultimately the reimagine phase, which is as we look long term, we know we want to build back better than what was there. So we did change that name from rebuild because it's not just about rebuilding what was there, but it's rebuilding and thinking about new things as well. So that did change to reimagine. As we look at the core areas of Restore, just to give a sense of what's all within that scope from the recovery effort, that's a lot of things focused on intermediate housing and home stabilization and repair, debris removal and demolition, and resident support. But it also is public infrastructure restoration like sidewalks and tree canopy, and also communal infrastructure and institutional anchors within the community. As we look more broadly at Reimagine, that's really thinking about the longer-term neighborhood vision and planning for how we think about what the community wants those neighborhoods to look like. That also includes things like longer-term housing. We know in many of the areas impacted by the tornado, there were vacant lots that were there, and there's already been conversation. We think about long-term infill housing in that area, as well as we think about property that may have to be demoed. Longer-term reconstruction and rebuild does take longer than typically a year or 2 years that might be in the Restore effort, and then as well as business corridor development. But as we think about the Recovery Office, all of these areas are focused, but I did want to highlight 4 that are the core focus of what we're working on, that are the more high priority focus areas. One is housing and home stabilization, recognizing that winter is coming upon us quickly, and so how do we make sure everyone has safe housing? Continuing to do debris removal and demolition in the area. It is the resident support, so the resource hubs and case management that we've talked about, as well as starting the neighborhood vision and planning process so that once we are focusing on longer term rebuild, we know what we're toward. So wanted to highlight that core area. If we go to the next page here, so the agenda for today, we'll talk about 4 different aspects. One, I want to use the time to talk about some of the broader recovery updates that'll be important to understand the context tied to a lot of the funding priorities that we're working through. We'll talk a little bit about more of a detailed update on the RAM's interests, and then a few little small things around a path forward. I won't spend or go through every single slide and every single aspect. I'll try to hit on the core areas. That way we can open it up to the committee quickly for questions. So the next page here is just a reminder that we've set 5 overall priorities for the Recovery Office that are also the structure of our task forces within it, which is how do we think about caring for one another? How do we remove debris and restore infrastructure? How do we think about restoring and rebuilding housing? How do we think about accelerating communal planning and development, as well as catalyzing neighborhood economies? And so I know I shared this with the committee before, but wanted to re-anchor around these are the 5 task forces we've organized within the Recovery Office and have cross-functional teams working on these core efforts. Next page. So this really kind of focuses where we're focused at through the 2025 as our top priority area. One of them is how do we maximize available intermediate housing by winter? How do we think about establishing intermediate community resource hubs that replace these short-term hubs that were set up by many groups on the ground, whether that be 314 Oasis, whether that be the People's Response, who I see in the audience, who also set up early, from the Urban League, Love the Lou, so many different groups that have operated on the ground. How do we think about the permanent long-term infrastructure for the near term that becomes those community resource hubs? The elimination of debris and demolishing unsafe structures in the area, and the 4th being the launch of our formal community engagement and neighborhood planning efforts. I want to acknowledge there's a lot of work still ongoing beyond these top priorities, but these are the core areas that we're really heavily focused on in terms of our overall efforts. As we go to the next page here. So I did want to orient around a broader framework for how the city is starting to think about the various programs tied to housing specifically. So you'll see on the left is broader intermediate housing. This is really thinking about housing that can come available or that we can bring online, really focusing on the next 6 to 12 months. Versus long-term housing is really things that need to fundamentally be built. Construction usually takes over a year or 2 years to do. And so we are intentionally separating out the short-term efforts versus the longer-term efforts, pushing still on the long-term, but with a core focus on the intermediate housing on the short-term. So as we look at the different areas of intermediate housing, we look at 4 core categories. One of them is stabilization and home repair, recognizing there's a lot of homeowners who want to get back and be in their homes or are in their homes, not a condition that's livable. There's intermediate housing production, which is how do we bring more housing options online for folks. We do know that as we look at housing, there is not enough affordable housing for the groups in this core area. So the question is, how do we bring affordable housing that keeps people here in the city of St. Louis? There is financial assistance, which is both what we call rental assistance, directly helping people pay rent at individual properties, or direct leasing, by which the city can own contracts with an entire set of apartments and be responsible for paying that rent instead of the direct renter. As well as traditional transitional housing, which is traditional shelters such as hotels, and the COC, which is a continuum of care shelters that are already strong partners of the city. Along the side of home repair, we have 3 programs. One is emergency stabilization funded out of ARPA, the Healthy Home Repair Program, which there has been dollars allocated by the city, but additional dollars are being flowed through there, specifically out of the tornado RAMS interest funds, as well as there's home repair partners, such as the Home Repair Network and MHDC, which is the state program that awarded about $25 million to be for communities to do both home repair as well as financial assistance. And so we keep track of all 3 of those programs. Really, with the home repair, individual nonprofits can get up to $1 million to do home repair. So we're focusing on how does the city help support the matching of people with those funds to hopefully decrease the burden on residents as they apply to these programs, but potentially other programs that may be set up for home repair programs out of those dollars. Out of the intermediate housing production, there's 2 things that are focusing on there. One is vacant unit turn. That's a program we're already spinning up. The focus of that is bringing on hundreds of units of property that is already available in the city of St. Louis, but in need of fairly minor to become available. The initial focus there is on affordable public housing. And the second is affordable housing from nonprofits, specifically community development corporations or CDC nonprofits who own property and rent at lower overall affordable rates. And so there's a lot of groups there who do not bring housing online or have not, simply because they don't have the funds or finances from an operating cash flow. A lot of those organizations are very low on cash, and so it's funding to help support them to bring those units online to become available for people who qualify for FEMA rental assistance and have it, who we know can't find housing simply because the rent prices for what's available is too high. The second is then temporary housing, which is trailer RVs and tiny homes. That has not been a program that's been an immediate focus, but one that continues to stay in consideration as we look at all the different areas to bring housing online. And then the last but not least is transitional housing, which is larger shelters. So we continue to operate the hoteling program in partnership with the Urban League and the American Red Cross, as well as we still have our continuum of care shelters that are open and then supported. And then in long-term housing, these are areas that are going to be longer-term focus areas that are still overall in discussion with the broader housing task force, as well as SLDC and other core partners. As we go to the next page here. So the second here is how do we think about intermediate community resource hubs? And we're thinking about how do we focus on designing and launching a support model through next year. So the tentative goals of intermediate resource hubs is 1, a collective effort in continuing care in response to trauma and direct individual needs created by the tornado. We recognize that there is the immediate need of housing, but we also recognize the emotional and mental health elements of what happens. So the goal is to create and maintain physical presence in community to support healing, manage the loss of home, and support for basic food and supplies, social, financial, legal, and overall spiritual needs. With a plan for multiple physical hubs with equitable access throughout the 3 zones within the tornado across communities and consistent resources for support. We know there are a lot of groups on the ground who have been doing this work and continue to do this. The goal is to help enable those efforts to be maintained with regular hours and regular consistency, as well as to put a lot of the resources that the city is trying to bring online, whether that be disaster case management or legal services, and be able to co-locate those resources within hubs in a more consistent model. The goal is not for the city to create or launch a program that is top down, but is really to start leading with the community groups on the ground who are already doing as a collective collaboration to help. Those groups have already developed a ton of trust directly in the community. They know those community members, and they've also demonstrated responsiveness to community needs in the immediate tornado aftermath. We are still actively working through those plans with some of those groups and hope to have an announcement soon, but I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the overall financing side. If we go to the next page here, so the next page that you all see, I'll start talking through it and hope that we'll get it to change over on the screens. We are looking at our intermediate debris removal effort. So one, I just want to summarize that there's 3 phases that people may have heard us talking about, but I know can be confusing from the public. So I just want to highlight that there's 3 phases that we look at for broader debris removal. Phase 1 is really the emergency debris removal. This was in the immediate aftermath of the tornado, really focused on clearing streets and alleys to make sure that trucks and people can get through to the right of way, and the really, really high buildup on street curbs. So that's when you saw the Parks and Forestry Department and Street Department fully on the streets, clearing out debris, combined with some of the contractor community who came out and supported those efforts really in the first few weeks of the tornado. We've been lately in the intermediate debris removal effort, which has been focused on clearing parks, the temporary debris sites that were set up at St. Louis Public Schools, but also in some of the lots within community, and then property debris placed on the street side, as well as our emergency demolition efforts that are taking place within the area. So this will continue for the next 2 months in our intermediate debris removal efforts, and we're undergoing planning for the long-term debris removal. So this is really the effort that Mayor Spencer talks a lot about. This is the hundreds of millions of dollars that it takes to actually be able to remove debris on mostly private property, including structural safety demolitions. And so this will include both private property and public property as we start to look at these long-term efforts. We know there are thousands of properties within the zone that are damaged. Many of them are damaged in the need that is going to require structural demolition and removal of debris. And so this is a massive effort as we start to plan and coordinate for that. Our hope is still that the FEMA and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be able to support this effort, but we're also in the process of planning for when that support, or if that support doesn't come. As we go to the next page here, and I'll cover this one quickly. The intermediate, we've already completed the removal of debris from 4 of the St. Louis Public Schools temporary debris sites that were set up during the tornado. We also had 2 large temporary debris sites that were set up both to empty the debris from this area, also from the street side, while we were setting up long-term landfills to remove debris. And then we had debris from the right-of-way from July to August. That was the Spiritus contract that was doing debris removal on streets. As we've talked about before, we did have to cancel that contract due to issues, and so we started with the new contractor this week. Looks Great Services is currently out deployed in the field right now, and then we made an announcement today about broader efforts to help support additional private property debris removal directly in the community. We also have emergency demolitions that are underway, which is focused on demolition of structures our focus is demolition of structures that pose an immediate risk to an occupied adjacent structure. There have been 50 overall that have been identified. 29 are identified and still under review for whether or not they need to demolish or whether they qualify under an emergency demolition. And then 21 have already been confirmed. 4 have been executed. 5 were contracted awaiting execution. 3 were out for bid, and 9 are pending owner contact before we occupy or do overall demolition efforts. The next page here on page 3 really outlines the current intermediate debris removal efforts that's underway. So you can see on this page, Looks Great Services is doing this right-of-way debris removal. This one's different from the last contract. They are deployed in all 3 areas at once as they tackle this effort, and the goal is for them to get through all of the immediate impact area over the course of the next 3 weeks. It was a critical part of the new contract. They will be focused on right now for this week in the Penrose, Kingsway West, Kingsway East, and Fountain Park Lewis Place neighborhoods. As we look at the next week, they'll be focused on O'Fallon, Jeff Vanderloo, Academy, Sherman Park neighborhood, and Visitation Park. And then the last week, they'll be focused on the remaining areas in College Hill, Fairground, Greaterville and Ville, Central West End, and Skinker to Bolivar. So those are the areas that they'll be focused on in those efforts. After that, we still will have that contract continuing for another month that'll be able to do spot debris pickups as needed in the area to continue to make sure we're removing debris that's put on the curbside. As we go to the next page here, from a community engagement standpoint, one, as we focus here, we did announce 2 advisory committees to help drive the recovery effort. The goal is for this to be led by resident and community voices that really are focused on gathering community input on priorities. And this isn't the immediate priorities that are obvious. We know we need to do housing. We know we need to get debris out of the communities, but this is really focusing on how we start thinking about some of those longer term areas and how we start to have regular communication in the neighborhoods and in the community. And so there were 2 advisory committees that were announced. One was the Resident and Community Recovery Advisory Committee that's going to be focusing on supporting the community engaged priority setting and plans for long-term recovery by facilitating a lot of communication with affected residents in addition to the recovery office. And then there's the Civic Leaders Recovery Advisory Committee that's really focusing on support, the resourcing, and public-private partner activation around resident and community recovery priorities. We will continue as the recovery office to coordinate that input and finalize priorities and plans and drive the execution, but have advisory groups who are helping support that along the way. The next page here is really just for the public and for those who are interested. We are actively still taking applications through September 9th for the Resident Community Advisory Committee. We've included a QR code here for people to apply, but you can also go to stlrecovers.com and find out more information about the application. We're going to be doing an open call. We'll do a lottery selection to ensure broad representation of geography, demographics, and also impacts from the tornado, as well as we'll be taking interest in neighborhood planning committees as those efforts also start to go underway. On the next page here, I wanted to acknowledge the number of people who are serving on the Civic Leaders Advisory Committee and just say thank you. This is a wide variety of human services, health, faith, and advocacy organizations, neighborhood building organizations, education, workforce development, architecture, business, infrastructure, foundations, banks, and CDFIs. The goal was we recognized there's a lot of different groups who are doing tremendous efforts on the ground. And the goal is to figure out how do we start to drive a lot of those collective efforts and make sure we're all working in the joint same direction. A chance for leaders to both jointly connect on priorities, for us to also align on what the city's priorities are, as well as hear from external groups on how they can support or how they might share opinions or things that they're seeing on the ground tied to our broader recovery efforts. So we want to say thank you to this great group of leaders who will be joining and supporting in this overall effort. And the last page here is really the part that's focused on community engagement. This is critical. We know there's a lot of people who have talked about, and I did have a chance, I know I've been at a lot of neighborhood lately. I know I was also recently at the Great Run by Action St. Louis organizing event where people have been commenting on things they want in their neighborhood and what they want back in their neighborhoods or what they never had and that should have always been in those neighborhood efforts. The reality is those efforts start with a plan for what we want to accomplish that then allows the city to dedicate resources to it. So there was already a great initiative started under the last administration, Plan SDL, to help support neighborhood planning efforts. We are using those efforts and accelerating those efforts to help drive the viewpoint of the recovery. And so specifically, you can see in the color, you can see in the black line, the area that is the tornado impacted area, and the areas that are colored are areas that are undergoing neighborhood plans that are either already underway or that will be underway over the course of the next couple of months will be launching. And so we encourage people who want to say and shape what those neighborhoods look like and want to be involved, that there will be formal neighborhood planning committees and community input forums will be developed as part of this broader effort. But wanted to point that we are integrating this effort. We know there's a lot of silos. This will be integrated in direct partnership with the planning department as well as the recovery office as we work to share and work with community to design what these neighborhoods will look like and what we hope for them to look like after the tornado. Perfect. With that, I'll get to the heart, which is really the funding that helps support those priorities. And I always want to start with the priorities just so that hopefully in future meetings we won't have to go over those because they'll all be in alignment to those 4 sets of priorities. But we want to start there because the funding is really about how you can align the funding to support the strategy and the priorities of what we're trying to achieve through that. And so as we go through the funding update on the next page, we wanted to give an overall update on what we're looking at, broader kind of federal dollars that have been kind of allocated thus far. So there's been about 40 million in individual assistance across over 8,600 applications. There's been about 20.4 million, and I actually think those numbers are reversed. It should have been 20.4 million has been dispersed, and 90.3 million has been offered and brought our SBA loans into the community, as well as we still have, as part of the public assistance approval with FEMA, we have a 75% federal local cost match reimbursement for select expenses or categories. Not much of an update to the local state dollars. Those dollars are still there, but just acknowledging a lot of the dollars are still in direct, that 100 million is still in direct conversation with the governor's office around allocation, largely focusing on some of the larger debris efforts is where those conversations have gone thus far from the state's level of focus, but also have started entertaining and talking about conversations around housing. Naturally, a lot of that is still underway and is being formalized. There's about 25 million that we talked about for emergency housing assistance. That's what I talked about before. Some of that is in rental assistance. Some of that is in home repair assistance that's allocated into individual nonprofits. There have been, last time I checked, there were about 4 that have been already awarded locally that we're coordinating with, but more that have applied, including the city that has applied as well for that grant. And so we will be tracking what those dollars are, so at least we know how much other collective dollars are going into repair efforts and coordinating those efforts. And then we have the $5,000 income tax deduction for affected individuals. And then lastly, we have kind of at the bottom, we have about 20 million in emergency response operations that's already kind of been funded around debris removal, immediate assistance, staff straight line costs, and staff overtime. There's another amount of dollars in CDBG, DR, and ARPA that's been targeted toward the tornado zone, in addition to the RAMS settlement interest that we're going to be talking about more in detail today. So for this next part, for the next 2 pages, I am going to hand it over to Jim Hill to give a little bit of an update on where we are for the incurred expenses and obligated thus far. This is a viewpoint of the actual cash situation for what's showing up in the comptroller's accounts. I want to acknowledge that this does not mean this is what's been expended. Most of our groups file for invoices after the costs have been incurred, and so there is delays between these, but we want to make sure we gave an update on the actual finances we're seeing right now directly in the comptroller's funds and accounts.
Thank you, and I just first want to say I'm honored to be here in front of you, honored to be an employee of the city of St. Louis.
Could you state your first and last name again for us?
Yeah, first name Jim, last name Hill. I'm my title is Chief Financial and Cost Recovery Officer in the Mayor's office. By way of background, I'm a CPA. I spent 36 years in Ernst & Young, the international accounting firm. I retired in June. Started volunteering on the tornado cost recovery in early June and became an employee of the city on August 11th. So I'm in my 4th week. On this slide, this is what has been spent so far. It's 19.1 million. Of the 19.1 million, 15.6 is eligible for FEMA and state of Missouri matching reimbursement, and that has been my focus so far. And then there's another 32 million of committed and obligated funds that have been obligated at this point. You can see the categories: debris removal. The emergency response was the stuff like the fire and the police overtime. The emergency operations center. We had about 100 city-owned vehicles and equipment that was damaged in the tornado response, and then Board of Public Service, board up, temporary fencing, that. And then the last thing is has been the repairs to the infrastructure, which is primarily traffic signals, street lights. There's about 20 city-owned buildings that were damaged in the tornado, and some parks facilities, lighting, tennis courts, etc. On the next slide, we have we've submitted 5 projects to date, totaling $7.5 million that is going through the FEMA review and approval process. Hopefully the next slide will catch. Oh, there we go. And we expect to start receiving funds coming back into the city in October. And And I mentioned that of the 19.1 that we've incurred to date, 15.6 is going to be eligible for reimbursement. And then we also, just this week, we are in the process of engaging one of the country's leading FEMA public assistance cost recovery, expedite the cost recovery on the funds that have been spent to date. And I do want to note that consulting firm, 100% of their costs will be eligible for FEMA reimbursement. So if we do it right, the cost for that work should be fully reimbursed to the city, as is the cost, my salary and benefit.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. And one of the things I'll just reiterate about this is we recognize we're in a different environment with this federal government who is often trying to find ways to cut costs. Making sure that we submit correctly is critical for longer-term reimbursement. When we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars toward debris removal efforts, when we're talking about the size of the staff that we've put to it, we recognize that we'll be in a much better position to ensure that those dollars come back to the city. And then ultimately, these dollars are critical because this is what allows us to redeploy those dollars into other priority efforts as we get that cash back. And so this is the goal, is to make sure not only are we applying, but we're doing that in the process to bring the cash back in as quickly as possible so that we don't have cash issues to help fund other aspects of the recovery effort. Perfect. And so we'll do kind of update on broader RAMS entry. Go to the next page here. Next page. Perfect. So you'll see this page. This is a slight reorientation of what you all saw in the last meeting. This was mostly to show where the full $30 million that has been announced and allocated across core priorities went. I will say this, I work in the recovery office and I do this all day, every day, and it is hard to keep track. So we wanted to make sure we had an updated page that both you all and the public could understand around where all the dollars are currently allocated toward and being spent. This does not mean that some of these buckets may not move, but this is where we have dedicated those dollars. As we learn more about where it's being spent and where it's not being spent, we will reallocate to various areas, but hopefully this will be a standard page that we'll be able to understand for where all the $30 million is being focused through broader efforts. So we've kind of broken it out into a couple of sections. One is really the community resident services and cooling by the various areas that we've already kind of went through. So none of those are new expenses. So those are all part of the initial $18 million that was talked about last meeting. There is resource hubs, which is about $3.5 million. That is also all things that were part of the initial $18 million that was announced and discussed in the last meeting. There's about $10.5 million that have been tied to intermediate housing out of the RAMS funds, in addition to the emergency stabilization funds that came out of ARPA, as well as the CDBG dollars for shelter that came as well. And $5 million of that was recently announced as today. And that is primarily focusing on vacant unit turns and rental assistance, which we talked about previously. There's about $5.35 million that's been allocated toward private property debris removal work that is both tied to supporting groups on the ground who are organizing cleanup efforts to be able to continue those efforts with direct support from additional dumpsters and things by the city beyond what we've already been providing as directly available city dumpsters. And then there's the recovery office, which has about $1 million tied to the recovery office staffing spent over the next year, and $0.65 million in the cost recovery consulting services. Those dollars are largely reimbursable. At least the cost recovery consulting service is fully reimbursable, and so it will a large portion of the expenses under the recovery office as we revolve those dollars back in and through. So as we work through kind of the next area, I'm happy to talk more about the broader sets of funds, but the next 2 pages just really outline the current status of each of the current funds for a broader update. I will more so orient around the page and then take some more specific questions. So if we go to the next page here. So just a little bit around, so the left-hand side is aligned to the categories you saw on the previous page. The next one is the alignment with another $14 million that'll be deployed over the course of the next month as we move forward. So I'll be open to taking any kind of questions on the next round around some of the sub details there, but wanted to make sure I could share that with the group. And then last but not least, if we go to the next page. Next page. We'll just keep going through until we get to the next one. The next one. So just a little bit. So one, I know Jim hit on this before, but one will have cost recovery consulting support to begin hopefully next week pending E&A approval. Again, this will accelerate cost recovery, but also it'll provide those much more timely, regular external financial reporting and things that Alderman Aldridge politely requested well ahead of time in future meetings, but this will allow more real-time active reporting on all of the costs and finance efforts tied to the city, including recovery, and hopefully automate a lot more of those areas to allow us and our finance team to be more focused on the forward-looking aspects versus rectifications of dollars. Updates moving forward, we will focus more of these updates moving forward on finance only. I just wanted to acknowledge that I know I spent a lot of time on the priorities and a lot more of these, as I wanted to spare Jim of him having to report out on his very first meeting in the first 4 weeks, but a lot more of that will be led by Jim, and I'll be here often to take some questions as needed. And then wanted to flag that the Recovery Office will begin to hold regular program updates as separate forums, hopefully in the impact community, to kind of provide more regular updates so that people who can't get down here to City Hall can be also here hearing about what we're doing, but also working together to figure out how we can better support residents on the ground. And then, of course, we know Board of Alders is going back in session, so we imagine that a lot of our different committees will be working with multiple subcommittees of the Board of Alders. I know we have regular meetings with the impacted alders in the Recovery Office, and so we're happy to always find specialized time to talk about topics beyond finances with any of the relevant committees as requested. So with that, I will turn it over back to Alderman Aldrich for questions.
Okay, we're gonna go in order of.
Oh, sorry, one more. Sorry, this is the last one, is for STL Recovers for updates. Naturally, we have the STL Recovers website. We recently launched an STL Recovers kind of Instagram for people to track regular updates, and we'll also be having a Facebook and a newsletter that'll be coming soon.
Gotcha. And instead of starting with committee members, since there's several people here from the public, I'm gonna choose to hear from the public first before we go to committee members. So that means you have to stick around, Julia.
I was planning to.
All right. So if you would like to testify on what you heard today, there's a sign-up sheet up front if you haven't already signed up. Madam Clerk will call each person's name. Each person will have 3 minutes to testify or make a comment on kind of the expenditures of the report that we heard today. And we will, is there anybody online that is raising their hand, Madam Clerk? Okay, so we'll just start in order of how people had signed up. So, Madam Clerk, whenever you're ready, you can call the first name. When you do come up, just state your first and last name and the ward that you reside in.
Okay, first we have Julia, I'm not sure, Allen. Could you please state your award as well?
My name is Julia Allen.
And if you could talk a little bit into the mic, feel free to take it off. Yeah, you want, or
Okay, is that better?
we hear you.
Okay. I feel like, we all should go to dinner. I'm down here so much.
And Madam Clerk, can you keep time?
My name is Julia Allen, and I live in the 12th Ward. And I'm just going to make a statement, read from my statement that I put together. And the statement reads, "The North Star is used to provide navigation to travelers and navigators. Some say it is a guiding light and symbolizes constancy and reliability in a world that is full of change and uncertainty. Many say that it provides purpose, guidance, and direction, while others might say that it symbolizes cultural significance, hope, and it lights the way. When I think of North St. Louis and all its trials and tribulations over the past and present, I can stand before you and say North St. Louis fits all of the above. Today, the city of St. Louis is facing one of its most difficult tasks in its history, and that is the rebuilding of North St. Louis. We all have been in meeting after meeting for the last 100 plus days, and we still have not come up with a sustainable plan to even begin the process of just providing transitional housing to those most affected by the tornado. Why, were it not for residents in North St. Louis, some of the most groundbreaking, influential, and life-changing legal rulings that have affected all of us would not have been in existence today. How many of you know about Shelley versus Kramer or Brown versus the Board of Education? All of these cases were filed and won by people in North St. Louis, our regional North Star. These cases not only changed life for people in North St. Louis, but they paved the way to make life better for all of us in the region. We must keep in mind, a city divided cannot stand, nor a stool with 3 legs. By the way, the 3-legged stool approach has been the model used by politicians and the leaders of St. Louis for decades and decades. Preservation, conservation, and disinvestment. Now's the time for you as our elected officials to act and vote to give all of the Rams money for the rebuilding of our North Star, North St. Louis. We realize that it will take billions of dollars and time to rebuild North City, but the Rams money, all of it, is a good start. And I'm asking you, as our elected officials, to do the right thing and vote to give all of the Rams money to our North Star, North St. Louis. Thank you.
Next, we have Waikisha. I can't pronounce the last name. Is it Atkins?
It's Atkins.
Atkins.
Good evening. My name is Waikisha Atkins, and I'm in Ward 10 in Academy Sherman Park. On May 16th, I was home alone when I got a text on my phone from the National Weather Service that we were under a tornado warning. This text wasn't accompanied by a siren, no special alert, or no chime. Within a minute, my power went out. I went to my window to investigate and saw the utility pole being snatched out of my backyard. I hurried to my basement and didn't clear the steps before the tornado hit my house. I heard crashes, felt the house shaking violently. I looked out of my basement window and witnessed a horrific sight. What looked like a white cloud was on my street. There was debris hitting my vehicle. A tree got uprooted in front of my house, literally questioning if I'm going to make this out alive because there were a lot of debris hitting the window of the basement. I immediately called my in-laws, who happen to live 2 doors down. After 5 attempts, I connected with my mother-in-law, and she told me that my father-in-law's leg had been severed. He was a mere 2 feet from his basement door when a piece of roofing material from across the street went through his living room and severed his leg at the shin. We all attempted to call 911, and we weren't able to get through. I went outside for help as we weren't able to get in touch with emergency vehicles. I called for my neighbors for help, and they answered the call. Attempting to get my father-in-law out of the house as the ambulance arrived, and we diverted our attention to clearing debris so the emergency services had a clear pathway to get him to the ambulance. This story does end on a positive note, and after several blood transfusions and a month in the hospital, he's now preparing to get fitted for his prosthetic leg. The community rallied around his neighbors. The day of and subsequent days after, the efforts were boarding up each other's houses, helping to move debris, and really starting the path of rebuilding. Even while managing our own personal crisis, the theme was loving thy neighbor and showing support. Even if you aren't directly impacted, we are one St. Louis, and what affects one of us affects all of us. And we're looking forward to moving forward and restoring our city. Thank you.
Next, we have Armand Walker.
Hello, my name is Armand Walker, previously resident of Ward 9, recently Ward 2. I am with PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation. We have been working primarily in Fountain Park with Dr. Punch, 314 Oasis, other organizations since the tornado. And what I want to do today is highlight a petition that we have gathered with some of the demands that people in that community and surrounding areas have wanted to have done with these funds, and I am just going to highlight some of those items. So those are distribution centers in areas affected, in the affected areas for free water, food, and clothing, free temporary housing and hotels to provide for those who have lost their homes, to enact a utility freeze, a rent and mortgage moratorium, to provide federal aid and full insurance payouts directly to every resident of affected areas, a real rebuilding of these devastated communities that attempts to redress decades of harm and disinvestment by the city that got us to this point. And FEMA funds should go directly to affected residents in North St. Louis to enable this process and destigmatize the community. They have urged the Alder people to pass a bill that will ban property purchases that would enable gentrification and ban permits for new development with the exception of building affordable housing for those who have lost their homes due to this tornado and rebuilding for the current residents in those neighborhoods. And also have urged that the mayor should direct the police to refuse to comply with any eviction orders, and a full independent investigation into why the sirens did not go off despite the multi-million dollars of investment and testing the day before. Free mobile health clinics to be set up in hard-hit communities to treat urgent injuries and check for potential long-term complications and help with mental health for residents and the unhoused. The RAM settlement money should be used to provide funds for people to connect power to their homes and slow further deterioration. They've also asked for substance use programming and to create a program to care for the unhoused. Of course, there are many more people in that situation after this storm. So I recognize some of these items were brought up in the previous presentation, but I wanted to make sure I go through all of them because, again, these are directly things we've heard from people in the community during our time in Fountain Park. And this petition so far has 77 signatures online. There's a physical version with another 100 or so that we're continuing to pass out and build support around. This has also been sent over, I believe, to Megan Green, the Board of Aldermen President. And I think I'll stop there. Just wanted to make sure that those items were highlighted and hope that those will be under strong consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Rodney Wilson.
Good evening, y'all. Nice to see y'all this evening. My name is Rodney Wilson. I'm from the Fountain Park, Ward 10, I'm sorry. I was one of the original victims affected by the disaster. I lost my house in the process. As soon as it happened, I jumped straight into action based on my human service skills. I do a lot of volunteer work. I work with the Urban League. I work with Better Family Life. I'm very fond of James Clark and all of the active members in the Urban League, Dr. Punch as well. Regarding my area, right now, I'm just up here to speak on behalf of the community. I just want y'all to make sure that y'all putting y'all heart and y'all mind into it and not just trying to find places. It's real people that really got affected. Me being one of the active people in there, I was passing out food to the community. I got to see Mayor come. I got to see Dr. Punch and them in action. I got to see my last speaker who just was up. I seen everything. I'm currently, my house did experience a house fire as well based on electrical issues from the disaster. So currently I am one of those residents who is housed in a hotel. Now, in the hotel that I have been in, I've run into plenty of people in the community, and they like, hey, weren't you out there passing out food and stuff like that? I'm like, yeah. They like, man, we appreciate you, this and that. So I just want to make sure that y'all got a good character and y'all discernment is just as strong. And don't try to rebuild a body if you're not going to tend to the heart. If the heart fall, then the whole body fall. So just make sure y'all focus on repairing the heart of St. Louis, and then the rest of St. Louis will strive how it's supposed to. If you build the people, then the people gonna build the city. Keep that in mind. Thank y'all.
Next, we have DeAndrea Folsom.
Hello. My name is Deandra Folsom. I stayed off of Fountain in Auburn, and the day of the tornado, I was at work out in Sonterra Springs, and the tornado hit us out there first. So like I immediately called my children's school to see if anything was going on in the city, and they sounded like they weren't really, nothing was going on. So I wasn't worried. So, but fast forward, my mom called me and she was like, it was really, really bad and that I needed to get home. But the power lines were down in my job and the fire department wouldn't let us leave. I was stuck at my job and I used to get off at 7, but we weren't able to leave until like around 8 or 9. So by the time I got home, all my lights was out. I had to stop at Walmart to get some lights and stuff. My mom was like, you shouldn't try to stay tonight, but I didn't really think it was that bad. I didn't hear anything, hadn't spoken to anybody. I really didn't know, for real. But I was really scared for my kids after I found out like what they went through. They came home, they saw the house in dismay. Like it was just, the porch was down and everything. I feel for their hearts because they saw everything first. But when I got home, my windows was busted out, my daughter's room was busted out, and I had to stay that night, but I was scared because I didn't have anything to protect me or anything. So when I woke up, I found out that my whole roof was gone. Like the whole roof was gone. I'm at the bottom floor, so my ceiling was still there. So it's just like I lost everything, and it's just already just me and my kids. So I love the city. I want it to be rebuilt. I don't want other gentrification coming about, moving people out or coming about to making us feel uncomfortable being in our own neighborhood. I would like to go back to my neighborhood. And that's it.
Thank you. Next, we have Tammy Newberry or Newburn. Okay, next we'll move on to Deshauna Howard.
Good evening. I'm in the Fairground, O'Fallon neighborhood. Forgive my passion.
I'm sorry, could you speak into the mic?
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, state your name, first and last name for me.
Deshauna Howard. I'm in the O'Fallon Fairground neighborhood, and I ask you guys to forgive my passion because this May 16th is still a nightmare for me. I have PTSD behind this, and so does my children. On that day, I went from having a great afternoon, cooking in my kitchen, listening to music, interacting with my kids when my oldest daughter was at school, to just a dark cloud that just came across our street. I heard some knocking at my window, which I thought we have children across the street. They're outside all day. I'm thinking that they're playing. I go to the window. It looked like it was about 8, 9 o'clock at night, and it was around 2-some in the afternoon. So it started with hail hitting the windows, and all of a sudden we heard rain. And so my kids began to get scared. I didn't know, I didn't hear a siren. I didn't know it was a storm, tornado, or what. I just know that it went from being a nice sunny day to a dark, gloomy nightmare. That day, we heard a lot of, sounded like commotion outside. I went to look, my screen door was open, it was locked. I went to look and I seen debris, bricks, wood boards, all type of stuff just in the air. And I'm thinking to myself, like, am I dreaming? This don't happen. I really did. It took me a minute to see that this was really my reality. And once I figured out what was going on, I heard a loud boom. I closed my front door, I heard a loud boom. We stayed in a 2-family flat, the whole porch just collapsed. And at that point, we were trapped in the house. I go to the back door. My neighbors, the back part of their house split, and it was over the gate into our back door. The back porch collapsed. So at this point, me and my children are trapped in the house. My mother and her dog was trapped upstairs. I had to hear the screams and to stand there and look at my babies, and they crying and screaming is a mother's worst fear when you cannot help your child. I didn't have an answer to give them, and it hurt me so bad because that's the most scariest that I've been in my life. All I could think is that I'm finna die in this house with my babies. I go to the basement because that's what we're told. If it's a tornado, you go in the basement. When I touched that door, the Spirit of God told me, if you go down them steps and this house collapses, it ain't gonna be a good ending for you and your babies. I stood in that hallway and I just held my babies and I cried and I prayed until it was over. Before I knew it, I heard a lot of men outside. And God sent my landlord, and he came about 8 to 10 guys in the neighborhood. They came to carry and pry us out their house. The windows were blown out, the ceiling fell in our living room, in my bedroom, in my bathroom, and in the hallway. We literally had nothing and nowhere to go. So I just wanted to come and share my testimony with you guys because this can't happen. And if it does, we need something in place to where if it does happen again, we already have a plan of action to set it up. Even with the journey, it didn't stop there. My family, we have been scammed about 4 times trying to move to places. We have moved 7 times in 4 months. I'm not looking for sympathy, but I want y'all to know that God is real, and he kept me and my babies that day. I'm not a big speaker. I don't like talking to big crowds, but it's so dear to my heart that I want y'all to know that I'm not hurt of myself. So like the young man said, I'm asking God to search your heart, looking in somebody else's family. You know, sometimes you see people go through something, but it hit different when it's not you. And it also hit different when it is you. So I just want to be a part to where I can reach out to help somebody else. We stayed in a hotel out in Chesterfield, but we came to our neighborhood every day to bring food, to bring water, because my heart went out to those people that didn't have nowhere to go. So thank y'all for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Next, we have Mr. Chris Wilcock.
Good evening. My name is Chris Wilcox. I live in Ward 14. So as we start implementing the city's response to the tornado, which is already long delayed, we need to pay close attention to how the city's action represents its priorities. Rent assistance, for example, is nice, but it's very late. Last time rent assistance was made available back in January, it was very slow in going out. And given how long it took, it's concerning that there appeared to be no checks on whether landlords were receiving payment for tenants that they had already evicted. It's been months since April, and that's why it needs to be a major priority to protect tenants' rights. Many people have already been evicted, some of whom illegally. One way that the city can address this right now is to fully fund the tenant council program, which is obligated to fund but is already well delayed. Those of us who are familiar with what typically happens in a disaster like this is that it becomes an opportunity to privatize public services such as public schools and ease the acquisition of poor people's land in a feeding frenzy for real estate developers. Relatedly, we're going to need the city to be very specific about what it means to address administrative barriers to recovery. It sounds sensible in theory if we're talking about zoning or parking minimum. It would be terribly convenient for the real estate industry if what that actually means is a general deregulation for a race to the bottom for safety and quality of homes. Developers can also afford to do without tax abatements for a while. If we're going to tell regular people that they have to wait in line, we can make them a higher priority than corporate giveaways. All the more for the chemical plant being built by corporate war criminal ICL that would have had a catastrophic environmental impact if it was standing on April 16th. I'm not convinced that gimmicks for housing like container homes are necessary to ensure adequate housing. I'm certain that tiny homes are not more cost-effective than a normal, modest multifamily building. Real homes were in these neighborhoods before. They need to be there again. People deserve to be able to live in regular homes that don't settle for gimmick housing. Finally, I notice Ameren's on the list of, quote, civic leaders to advise a tornado recovery. That is certainly not a phrase I would use to describe them. If Ameren wants to make itself useful, instead of making tiny donations matched by larger marketing budgets to advertise them, it can stop disconnecting families in the tornado zone. God knows CEO Marty can afford a little cut to his multi-million-dollar annual compensation along with his shareholders. Thank you.
Next, we have Christopher Sudlick.
What's up? My name is Christopher Sudlick. I do not live in the city. I live in the county, but I was running an aid site from May 16th with the Party for Socialism and Liberation that Armand spoke with earlier for over a month down there, and it was a very interesting experience. I want to say from the day after the tornado, we were already seeing investors down there trying to bid people out of their homes, trying to see what they could pick up out of the area and who they could push out. And since then, I haven't seen a lot more efforts to keep people in their home from the city. I've seen a lot of delay tactics. I've seen a lot of pushing things down the road. I've seen a lot of using those signs and other tactics to keep people from going back into their homes so that, these investors can make bids and try to push them out. I'm not a fan of that. I really think that these people, this community needs to be able to stay in the community. People need to be able to stay in their homes, and we need to be able to recover in place and rebuild and undo the disinvestment of the past 50 or 60 years of the Del Mar Divide. All of this is connected. I also want to say that I've been working a lot with Dr. Punch and 314 Oasis, and I know the city's been really slow to get funds out and to help support these organizations that have been on the ground in the city, providing the support, space, and resources for people to stay safe, to feel connected, and to help recover from the disaster, not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally. That's all. That's about all I got to say, besides stop the gentrification and support our neighbors in Fountain Park and all through North City. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Demetrius Davis.
Greetings. My name is Demetrius Davis. I'm from the Greater Ville in North St. Louis.
I'm sorry, could you speak a little louder for us?
Yes, ma'am. Can I make it go up? Okay, let's start again. My name is Demetrius Davis. I've been a resident of the city of St. Louis all my life. I'm currently a resident of the Greater Ville. For as long as I can remember, the north side of St. Louis has always been deemed to be a bad place. But the north side of St. Louis is indeed the heart of this city. North St. Louis is the origin of soul and black pride. And we've never had proper jobs, recreation, and resources. We've always had liquor stores and bars on every corner. All of this before May 16th. And May 16th occurred, and that kind of pushed us further back. On May 16th, I was cutting my grass. May 16th was a Friday, and it was my weekend to have my daughter. I wanted to cut the grass so we can have a nice little oasis in the backyard. I'm pretty much a nature freak, and I love to be outside. One of the most devastating things from this tornado is to see all the trees that fell from St. Louis. And without trees, it's gonna minimize the oxygen that we have in the city and makes the air quality lower. and everybody knows how, the heat can really mess with your mind and do things to you. So that's a mental health thing in a lot of manners for me and other people, not just to see the trees gone, but to experience the heat and the lack of air quality that we have. I was cutting the grass on May 16th. I never heard a siren. And so I left to get my daughter from school, and it started to rain. It started to rain, it started to hail. But the only mission I had was to get my daughter from school. So I actually drove through this storm to get her from school. On my way back, it normally takes 20 to 30 minutes to get from her school to my home, but on my way back, it took 2 hours to get to my house. And the worst thing for me was to wonder what my house looked like. And so once I did finally make it to my home, it wasn't too bad, but I have some roof damage and some water damage inside. I'm on Labadie in the Greaterville, and on my block, we band together. We've always band together. And once the storm happened, we definitely came together and shared resources. Over the past 100 days since the storm has happened, I've noticed less crimes in my neighborhood. I noticed more unity. I think that this is a possibility for us to continue moving forward, to have less crimes and more unity if we do what's necessary for the North Side. Again, the North Side has always been deemed a bad place, but it's always been the heart of the city. We need more resources, more recreation, and less bars and less liquor stores. With the Rams Fund, this can be accomplished. On the south side of St. Louis, we have skate parks for skateboarders and people who ride scooters. We don't have that on the north side. There's a lot of things that we have on the south side of St. Louis that's not on the north side of St. Louis. And with lack of resources, that hinders people from elevating. That gives you the opportunity to try to find other things to do. So we need more resources and we need more recreation. And the funds from the Rams can definitely help us out. I also would like to note that we don't want any plywood houses in the city of St. Louis. We have some of the oldest, most historical bricks, and every time something happens to a house, it's always being removed and shipped somewhere else. We need to maintain having these strong, sturdy brick houses in the city of St. Louis and not waste time and resources with houses that won't last. We never thought that this tornado could do what it did to our brick houses, but imagine what it would do to plywood houses if we start rebuilding them in our neighborhood. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you. Next, we have Damon Starks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Damon Starks. I live in the 11th Ward, and I work for Action St. Louis as the housing justice organizer. So, I'm here tonight to talk about our demand. Our demands are simple. Our demands, we already went through this process and won. Some of these bills got passed already, which I'm finna talk about. They're just not fully funded. So, here we go. I ask that we fully fund the right to counsel to $2 million using the RAM settlement money. This $2 million will help those families that is already greater impacted, that is at their most vulnerable. You look at who's vulnerable, the most vulnerable to get evicted out their home. Those who usually can't afford to move or anything else like that. This $2 million has already been passed. The right to counsel has already been passed. Why are we still fighting for this to be fully funded? I don't know. All I got to say is the failure would not be on Action St. Louis. It will be on the Board of Aldermen. That's all I'm going to say on that. It will be on the Board of Aldermen because this was already passed. Secondly, I would say we need our demand is to fully fund and permanently fund the impacted tenant fund to $1 million. We have to remember thousands of families and houses were displaced. If you increase that fund to $1 million, that will help those who are greatly impacted by this. Thousands of people lost their homes. This tornado hit at a time where a lot of people probably didn't have funding to move. So the city, by helping them move and do the impact attendant fund, this would do that for them. It will give them a helping hand. That's something we truly need to fund. And thirdly, we need to increase the funding for the Affordable Housing Commission for neighborhood stabilization. Before the tornado hit, St. Louis was already 35,000 houses short of housing units, livable housing units. Let's increase that fund. Julian talked about how can we do affordable housing in the plan moving forward. Well, increasing that funding to that organization can do that. That's how you do it, by increasing funding using that RAM settlement money. It's enough RAM settlement money to go around to fund those. Let's utilize those funds. Thank you, and y'all have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Starks. Next, we have Andrew Rucker.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Rucker. I again am coming from as a Northside native and a representative of my community in the board. I reached out to many people, many family members, neighbors that could not be here but still wanted to make their voice heard concerning this matter, from the elderly to the youth, and I asked them one question. What would you like to tell this esteemed board tonight? They had many answers, but one question rang out more than the rest. On behalf of the residents of the North Side, they collectively and affectionately, and pardon me for the use of urban colloquialisms in a professional setting, but when is Karen Spencer and them gonna stop playing in our faces like we don't see what they doing? From the photo op from the boots to the ground to the aid that was placed nowhere near where the people were at the Chaffetz, and a lot of people couldn't get there due to the lack of vehicles or phones to even possibly get an Uber or Lyft, or to place in all the men and women who have been breaking their necks and only had a limited amount of power in their to place in our faces to get the brunt of complaints, when some of the people that we know that it takes all of the board to get all of the votes to pass so we can get the funding that we needed, but they sit and hide in their comfy zones that weren't affected. To not educating the people how to fill out the FEMA applications, only to be denied when they are desperately in need, only to be followed up with predatory SBA loans, down to the news releases on September 2nd that said from KMOV from the city saying major demolition tornado debris cleaned up slated to begin as early as November, like we don't need the help because the tornado happened in May. All the way down to the local government penny pitching this Rams money like it's coming from your pockets, when only $12 million added to the $30 million pot to be released and spread throughout the entire city when you got $250 million is insane. It was mentioned that there will be hubs, but will those hubs be centralized in zones A, B, and C, especially C, that will have the necessary resources for residents who can't travel to places like the Chaffetz? Do you have a database created to capture the names of businesses that's been scamming residents in order to prosecute them? What safeguards are you putting in place so that in-town predators like McKee and Clayco and outside investors from different states aren't able to claim our deeds? How are you helping displaced students in things like mental health and travel resources? Let's see. When are you going to finally tear down the houses that have been empty for years and now because of the tornado are leaning on other people's houses? When will the SLDC stop playing with residents with these asinine rules when the people who live here want to beautify their own neighborhoods? When will there be free health screenings to those that are offered because they may be experiencing a tornado lung or any other health issues? And lastly, whoever is in charge of the money, please stop playing and open up the floodgates to help these communities that's been asking for help for decades. Lastly, I know, there's so much time that I have, but I want to say thank you to Jean, Laura, Shameen, Pamela, and Kimberly Ann, and anybody else that I forgot. Place it on my horrible memory and not my heart. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rucker. Next, we have Melanie Marie.
Thank you. President of the board, board members, and community. My name is Melanie Marie. I am the People's Response Organizer with Action St. Louis. First, I want to thank the folks that you heard speak before me that have come from our organization. Those are the People's Response Fellows. We have 20 community members that have been impacted by the tornado, from College Hill through Academy. And we've selected 2 community members from each of those areas to come and learn political education, civic education, and learn how to advocate for themselves throughout this long-term recovery. So I want to thank them for their bravery and for their transparency tonight in sharing their story. It has been 111 days since the tornado struck. We know the devastation the city went through. We know human error caused the sirens to not sound. Homes were lost, families were displaced, and the plan formed to make downtown an entertainment district is underway. That chapter is already written. What matters now is what comes next. Recovery is not between May 2025 and May 2027. Between May 2025 and May 2027, it's just not enough. Families cannot live on vague promises. They need to know when they will have shelter. Phase 2 of recovery cannot mean delay, denial, or any more confusion. It must mean direct support now. It must mean an accountable housing plan with measurable deadlines. And it must mean transparency so that we, the people most impacted, can see with our own eyes how recovery is being delivered. When we are riding down the streets, we are still seeing the same trees, the same debris, and everything that was there from May 16th. Budgets are moral documents. If this budget has room for contracts and cleanup schedules, but cannot produce a transparent and urgent housing time, then it is not a budget of recovery. It is a budget of abandonment and neglect, the same neglect and abandonment that has happened for decades. I'm also encouraging to revisit the terms of the RFP for organizations to receive the $150,000 assistance. The guidelines are more complicated than we hoped, especially for those who are grassroots. Many of them do not have a 501c3 to back themselves up. Many comrades stood up infrastructure and are now struggling to sustain. We really need that revisited. We survived the storm after being led by the people, for the people. But long-term recovery requires leadership with urgency, accountability, and again, transparency. I'm hoping the voices of the impacted community has been felt by you on today, and that our voices are heard furthermore. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Michael McLemore.
All right. Can y'all believe it's my first time testifying down here after all this time? Okay. So I'm Michael McLemore. I reside in the 12th Ward, Greaterville neighborhood. I wanted to come down and speak today, especially as the Board of Aldermen right now is heading back towards session, and with as much pressure as we're getting from the community about the RAMS fund. I know that there are outside interests also pulling as we are, namely downtown interests, including Explore St. Louis, Greater St. Louis, Inc., and Lodging Hospitality Management. We know that recently Governor Keogh signed a downtown entertainment district for downtown, backed by those same groups I just mentioned. And I just want to highlight also that last year GSL offered to match $100 million if they were given $100 million of the Rams money. But they were also unwilling to put that money anywhere else in the city, and that's kind of where we are today as far as like still having the money in the bank. With that kind of in mind, downtown didn't need money for the new roller coasters down at Union Station. It's going to likely create its own taxing district on top of the dozen other taxing districts in the area. So there's money coming in all over the place at this point. So kind of with those kind of ideas in mind, I would advocate that the lion's share of the Rams Fund go towards North St. Louis recovery efforts, be it house recoveries, school recoveries, especially to open a lot of the historic schools in the area, including a number of which are in my own neighborhood. In fact, all three of the schools that I went to in the SLPS were all affected by the tornado, Hickey, Yateman, and Beaumont. But namely schools like Sumner, who, first high school west of the Mississippi River for Black people, right? Those institutions have to be saved. They can't just be moved to another school and that building becomes a relic that buckles like the old Cleveland ROTC school did. So those are just kind of the things that I have in mind, as we approach a brand new session. And I know that there'll be future committee hearings in which they'll, downtown will send their representatives about, the benefits of investing more money downtown and what that means for the entirety of the city. When we've seen in other cities like Detroit, where those investments downtown, hey, the economy downtown is booming, what about the rest of the city? So those are the kind of things I want, to kind of keep on everybody's mind moving forward as we head towards this next automatic session. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Amina Lobster.
Good evening. My name is Amina Lobster. I reside in Ward 3. So I'm here as both a concerned resident and a member of Transform 314. Transform 314 is an organization that aims to educate, engage, and empower Black St. Louisans to drive policy changes on a local level, to create thriving communities. As many have stated, the rebuilding of North St. Louis cannot happen without residents at the forefront. They cannot properly monitor and give input without all the proper information, though. Money has already begun to be allocated, and there's no singular way for residents to determine where the money has been allocated and when it's going to be spent. We need a transparency portal, just as it was done for the ARPA funds. Not only does there need to be a transparency portal, but there needs to be progress reports at these monthly meetings regarding how individual contracts are progressing. Just as Mr. Nick said earlier, he is doing recovery efforts all day, every day, and it's difficult for him to keep up where the funds are going. And that's only more difficult for a family that was devastated by the tornado and is struggling to make it day by day, but thinks that they need to hold their city accountable. One of the priorities of the office is to create or care for one another. How can we say that we care for a community if we don't give them the proper tools to advocate and empower themselves? The city cannot afford to have another initiative with good intentions that is not executed properly. We cannot pretend that we don't understand the consequences of a natural disaster. All we have to do is look at the after effects of Hurricane Katrina as we reach the 20-year anniversary. Although I understand that this is a tornado and that was a hurricane, we still understand the consequences, as many residents in Katrina were unable to return to their homes. And more than 100,000 evacuees from Katrina moved to Houston, Texas, never to return. The tornado caused devastation in so many ways. It destroyed homes, it destroyed businesses, it destroyed streets, but the most important thing that can never be replaced are the people. The people that have lived in these neighborhoods, that have mourned in these neighborhoods, that have celebrated in these neighborhoods for generations. And those generational memories cannot be replaced. And with those memories come knowledge. And that knowledge can't just be gained with a master's degree from a university, and knowledge can't be gathered at will. This knowledge can be used to create thriving communities, but the city has to listen. So we can never hope to restore if we don't start this process with transparency. Just like New Orleans, North St. Louis is a special place that is defined by the people that live there. So unless we open clear lines of communication, we are dooming ourselves to lose people. Because once people lose hope in the city, they leave the city altogether. Thank you.
We have Brittany Jones online.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brittany Jones, and I'm here representing the City of St. Louis's Joint Department of Health, especially its behavioral health and community outreach teams, for their active presence in impacted communities. This disaster underscores a broader truth. Recovery is a public health issue. The storm exposed and exacerbated longstanding gaps in housing, food access, trauma support, and environmental safety. These are not outlining concerns. They are essential to our health equity and community stability. As such, the Department of Health must be positioned as a core stakeholder in both the city's immediate recovery and long-term planning efforts. Through our respective areas of work, we've identified 5 key public health priorities in recovery. 1, stabilize housing and health access for displaced residents. In real time, we are witnessing housing insecurity as a health hazard. 2, address the food gap worsened by recent funding cuts to public health nutrition programs like Food RX. Recovery efforts must fill this gap to prevent rising food insecurity. 3, ensure safe environments through clean water access, debris safety guidance, and disease prevention efforts. 4, leverage the Department of Health outreach and behavioral health teams, not only for service delivery, but as a trusted conduit of community voice. Residents have been clear about their needs, and their insights must shape how the city moves forward. And 5, include the Department of Health in cross-sector disaster planning to drive equitable strategy and ensure residents' needs shape the city's response. We ask that recovery funds be used transparently, equitably, and guided directly by community voice and needs. Our city's resilience depends on our public health programs being both restored and prioritized. The board remains committed to supporting both recovery and the department during this leadership transition, and we stand ready to contribute expertise and accountability. So, in service and solidarity, the City of St. Louis Joint Board of Health and Hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else? I know some people came in a little later. Did anybody else want to sign up and testify before we close out the committee part? Okay, seeing none. I want to personally thank everybody who that's here today and told your story. What happened on when the tornado happened is, for a lot of folks that told that story or told your story today, I know it's still very traumatizing. When some of y'all was speaking, I was holding back my own tears, and I know I haven't heard it even in the clerk's voice. But truly, thank you for sharing and speaking directly to us up here who do have the ability to do more, and I know we want to do more, and those stories is critical for us in this room and for the whole board to be able to hear these things as it's live and folks can go back and watch it. So genuinely, I want to thank everybody for being vulnerable and sharing something that is life-changing. So thank you. I'm going to start. So now we'll go, Julian probably want to come back up. I'll go in order of seniority of committee members. I'm going to start with Alderman Browning for any questions that they may have for Mr. Nix or any of the rest of the recovery team or Mr. Director Pearson. Alderman Browning.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Nix, and everybody, all the public who's come out today. It's been remarkable to hear some of your stories about the day of May 16th. And we know it's a day that changed our city, and it's going to be a long road to recovery, but your voices are part of that. And it's going to be really important that as we go forward, we do this with community. I completely agree with that. I'm also glad to hear that people, I did hear someone mention Katrina, and we did just pass the 20-year anniversary of Katrina, and New Orleans has never fully recovered from that disaster. Now, it was a much worse disaster than we had in our city. I want to be clear, we're not comparing disasters here, not disaster Olympics, but we want to make sure we notice that the mistakes that were made there was the lack of federal response. And changes were made to FEMA after that, after that heartbreaking scenes in that city that lasted for weeks because they were not prepared to respond to that disaster. And some major changes were made. It was a really big moment for the United States to notice what we needed to do to respond to a worsening situation with natural disasters that has now continued to ratchet up as we experience climate change. But the Trump administration has reversed those changes. They've come in and they've been cruel. And now we are faced to do this on our own, more or less. So while we hear the need for housing takes time to build. While we hear the need for getting aid out quickly, that takes time. And the city wasn't exactly humming along before the tornado hit. We weren't picking up your trash before the tornado hit. We weren't doing our basic services before the tornado hit. And now we're faced with doing those things as well as trying to help as much as we can. So my first question for you, Mr. Nix, is how long does the typical bid process work for the city? Getting contracts out, getting that help out, how long does that process take?
Usually it can take over a month. From the moment that you start kind of actually moving it through the process, not including writing. From the time it takes to actually post the RFP, it has to sit for 2 to 3 weeks. Then after that, it has to go through the broader award process. Then it has to go through E&A, and then it has to go through signing. So most contracts, on average, take over a month just from the moment that you issue the initial RFP response. And so that does drive a lot of aspects of delays. I want to say thank you to the Board of E&A, and I know President Green is a member that's here, the mayor, the comptroller, who've done a lot to try to move that process along, and to the legal department, who's done a lot of work to move that along. But I think that one of the things the Board of Alders will have to relook at coming this next cycle is how we look at our broader procurement policy, because it is a huge slowdown from a broader recovery effort standpoint.
Thank you. And has the emergency declaration been able to shorten that timeline at all, or is there anything that's done to move that faster?
No, the emergency declaration allows you to do that in the first early kind of months of the tornado, but most aspects when you start to go to FEMA have a time bound to that. So unfortunately, while that was to accelerate things pretty early, now we're kind of required to go back through our normal city procurement process, because we don't have a process that says this is how you can run procurement in contingent circumstances.
And that city procurement process that exists because I think past boards have passed rules to make sure that we're spending taxpayer money responsibly and transparently and fairly. Gone are the days where we hand out city contracts to the mayor's friends, and we're trying to do this in a way that benefits, all the community, as well as making sure that we lift up. I know we've recently had to be negotiating MBE and WBE contracts. That's minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. We try to include those in our city contracts because we want to lift up communities that have been traditionally left out of those fair contracts. So all those things, though, that adds bureaucracy that then kind of really handcuffs us when we're in an emergency. So that's why I'm kind of asking those questions, because I think it's important to note that on a typical day, we do try to be responsible, but when an emergency hits, it doesn't leave us in the best situation. And that's where FEMA was advantaged to be able to come in and act quickly and get boots on the ground. when a tornado hit Joplin almost a little over 10 years ago, a small army arrived from the federal government to help clear debris, including the Army Corps of Engineers, which we are waiting on a response still. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we're waiting. Just as we waited 3 weeks to get a disaster declaration from this president. Again, cruel. But this is what we're having to deal with. Now, I've heard estimates for debris removal that are around 700 million. Can you provide a little more information on what that includes? Is that the right of way? Is that private property?
That is the estimate from the U.S. Army Corps for a full debris mission to remove about 1 million tons of debris in neighborhoods. It's largely the debris on private property. So that's demolition and removal of the full debris on various parcels. So just for context, FEMA does tend to overestimate because when an approval comes through from the federal government, they can't exceed that number. So they tend to overestimate relative to what it actually would cost. But the estimate is that number, specifically a USACE estimate for them to perform that mission.
So I think during your presentation, I heard that debris removal was ongoing, but largely the right-of-way has been cleared. And that's, I think, when you said debris removal, I think you were talking about like the right-of-way. Is that?
So sorry, no. When I said, we kind of go back, the emergency debris phase was complete. That was the more immediate clearing to give street and right-of-way access through alleys. The second phase of intermediate is ongoing. We've completed debris removal from a couple of sites, core sites that had debris, so the St. Louis Public Schools temporary debris sites and the 2 other larger temporary debris sites, those have been cleared. Right-of-way is still being actively cleared and will continue to be actively cleared until the debris are out of community. And that effort, we re-engaged a group that started this week.
And so jumping to that, Spiritus Worldwide, which is different from Spiritus Wrecking, which I learned last week, was hired to do debris removal, and they quit just shortly into the contract. Now, to say little of how irresponsible that was of them, that did leave our city in a tough position. Can you tell us a little more about how we picked them as the first contract? Because my understanding is this isn't the first time they've quit a contract. And what's happened now is that debris that should have been removed, debris that we told people move it out to the curb and we'll pick it up, has been sitting there now for months, and people are asking, why hasn't this been picked up? We did what we were told to do, and the city, for its efforts, did try to get it done, but we went with the wrong contractor. Can you tell us a little more about how that contractor was chosen and what was there?
Yeah, I can't fully speak to the full aspect of that award process, but we did have multiple contractors bid on that work for roughly around the same price. I do want to caveat this different aspect is the way that work bidded, and I was actually encouraged early by the U.S. Army Corps, was to do it on a tonnage basis. That group drastically underestimated how dispersed the debris was because they thought it was like a normal disaster. Usually normal disasters have a lot more of that debris concentrated, and so usually it's much faster to pick it up versus our debris was a lot more dispersed. And so they basically underbid the cost per tonnage. This contract, we did learn a lot from that. We rebid it and more of a time and material basis, and we expanded it from that standpoint. But they were roughly in the same cost tonnage as a couple of other firms. So we were under the impression that they would be a bidding at a reasonable cost until we kind of learned more throughout that contract.
Okay, thank you. So can you speak to some of the issues with removing debris on private property? What are the things that the city has to go through when we're dealing with debris on, someone's house collapsed and it's going to need to be demoed, or their roof is in the front yard? What can the city do, and what are the issues it faces when we're trying to clear debris from private property?
Yeah, so a couple. One is financing. Naturally, moving debris and demolishing structures on private property is expensive. So the first barrier that the city had to go through was getting private property debris removal added as a part of our public assistance. So when we receive a public assistance from FEMA. When they declared a disaster, they gave us public assistance, which is the ability to do more of like repair roads, streets, things that are damaged to the city, and then individual assistance, which is the traditional program people are aware of in the disaster recovery centers. As a part of the public assistance, you have to apply and be granted a private property debris removal mission. And these are all things we're learning as we go through. And we ultimately applied for that and then received that, which now gave us the arms to fund private property debris removal. Then the next big thing that was put in front of us was getting USACE to actually deploy. And that has been kind of the next big focus, is how do you start to organize massive amounts of contracts to do private property debris removal. There's a few different areas. One of them is there's a long process for how you actually get approval to go on property from folks. That is, one, required by the federal government for reimbursement, but also required for legal liabilities from a city perspective. You have to, one, actually get permission to enter. You have to get permission to enter from the owner. You have to validate that the owner is also on the title, and if not, you have to deconflict that. Then you have to actually do a site assessment of the amount of debris that is ultimately removed, and that is just to determine if that property is eligible from and what all needs to happen. After that, then you actually, after you declare that it is debris that's removable, you quantify it, you have to bid out to a massive number of contractors and things to actually come and remove that debris from communities. So that's kind of the broader process, and we're talking about this being the scale of thousands of homes. That is the difficulty that we run through, and we're talking about multiple contracts that have to be done. Typically, a city would only have to figure out how do we fund our cost share, and a lot of this direct activity, this direct contracting would happen by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They know these firms. They already have contracts with them that allows them to move at much more lightning speed, and hence why areas that we talk about, like Joplin, saw much faster public and private property debris removal immediately after. But now we have to go through our processes with our city workers who don't know construction contracts and things the same way, and have to move through this a much slower process than what it would be for the federal government.
So what I'm hearing is that in the past, it used to be that the federal government took the lead on these kinds of things, and they have the tools to and the relationships to move much faster. And again, the Trump administration's thing has been, we'll just push this to the states, and yet our state is kind of just like, well, we'll just push it to the local municipality because it doesn't like us in many ways. Or maybe they only care about downtown, or maybe care about crime when it suits their agenda. I guess, sorry, and I'm opining here, but I think I want to emphasize the federal government used to do these things. Like they've done it in other disasters, and yet, this administration has left us out in the cold, and that's made it doubly hard. So we've had to set up our own systems. We've had to create our own relationships. We've had to go out and really just stand up an entire disaster response, and just to roll back. We had a city emergency management agency that was made up of 5 people. So, we were prepared for the immediate maybe response, but not even that, right? Because we weren't even, again, not humming along before this. Okay, I'm gonna move on to just a couple other things, and I know I wanna give more time to other people, but housing. On the subject of housing, was Employment Connection able to get the Impacted Tenants Fund up and running? Are we making progress on that?
I'll let Dr. Pearson comment on that.
Good evening. My name is Adam Pearson, Director of the Department of Human Services. So the Impacted Tenants Fund, we have an executed contract with Employment Connections. The money we have allocated for that program is around $260,000. Some of the money that was used for what would have been a launch of the program came from ARPA money, and so that's to cover some of the administrative costs for Employment Connections. Did hear a comment tonight about how it would be great to fully fund the Impacted Tenants Fund. I know that one of the hesitancies early on was making sure that the money we rolled out via the Impacted Tenants Fund did not cancel out the money that folks would be getting from the individual assistance with FEMA. And so now that we have a better understanding about that IA process, all the financial designations that people got, all the money that people received from FEMA. I think it's worth revisiting the launch of the Impacted Tenants Fund now that we know that some of that funding is not going to conflict. One of the main issues that we wanted to make sure that we reviewed early on is that if people have funding from a city source, for example, that is used for a similar source of FEMA funding, some of that money may need to be paid back to FEMA, which is kind of worst case scenario for us. If there is a family that requires significant assistance, we give them some sort of cash assistance, and then they turn around a year later and have to pay that money back to FEMA. That's not fair for the families. And so I think now that we have a better understanding of how people are using the IA assistance, I think it's time for us to revisit.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I do believe Alderman Aldridge had, back when we had budget, it happened right in the middle of our budget session. The tornado hit right in the middle of May, which is when we're typically going through the budget process. And Alderman Aldridge jumped into action and sponsored an amendment to add something to the tune of $1 million to that fund. So I know that we've made efforts to try to fund that further, but I know we also uncovered during that budget session that none of the money had gotten out yet because it hadn't fully been set up yet. So that remains, I think, a priority. And I know you all are doing what you can, and that, again, our city's not set up to do some of these things, so we have to contract it out, and that's something that is in motion, but I appreciate you speaking to that. Last question I have is about public infrastructure. Has there been an audit of city infrastructure that has been damaged, or do we have an understanding about what that looks like? Sidewalks that need replacement, trees that need to be trimmed, removed, or replanted? Do we have estimates of that? And of the money that we've allocated so far, is that being used for that purpose?
Yes, so we don't have a full understanding of the estimate yet. Our team is currently working, so we prioritize first the kind of debris removal aspects of contracts. A next contract that does have to go out is one that is for those direct assessments of the trees and sidewalks that'll be more comprehensive, and then we'll have to have further conversations with the Board of Alders around what types of capital we can make available to do those broader sets of fixes. There is two priorities that my team is not in the top four, but one of them will be getting a sense of that size estimate, as well as prioritizing at least sidewalk and tree repairs that are in front of homes of people who are disabled as the core priority. So that will be a part of our focus through the back end of this year, but the longer term we're going to be focused on more emergency trees only, and then we'll have a broader program we'll have to figure out for trees and sidewalks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you mentioning accessibility. That's mainly why I'm asking, because while I can walk around a broken slab or a uprooted tree, I think people that depend on mobility devices might have difficulty with that. And same thing about lighting, lighting that was damaged in these neighborhoods. That comes back to public safety and making sure that people feel safe. So I'm as the chair of the public infrastructure, I'm keenly interested in that, and I would love to work with you how I can to make sure not only understand the scope of the damage, but quickly come up with a plan to replace it. Okay, I do have one more question. I'm sorry, I lied. This is a concern of mine. We have permits being pulled to repair homes, and we've got the Healthy Home Repair Program. We've got a number of other issues out there to try to help people repair their homes. Thanks to an ordinance that we passed in the aftermath of 200, that allowed us to have properties reassessed and then have their taxes prorated. So instead of what they were worth on the first of the year, we're going to look at, okay, now you can't live in your house because it's been damaged. We're not going to tax you the full amount. But that only lasts so long. And then with all these permits being pulled, that by state law, that they would have to come back and assess within a time limit. See is adding value to homes will cause taxes to then increase on those homes that we have helped repair. Has there been any thought to how we're going to handle that? Concerns about pushing people out and people losing housing if their taxes go up because they had to put a bunch of money into their house, that would be insult to injury. So maybe they can stay for 2 years, but not beyond that. So has there been any discussion about the result of that?
Transparently, I have not had those direct conversations, but I think it's a great point I can take back to my team.
Okay, yeah, something to flag. I really appreciate it. I'll just end by saying I really think that everyone is doing what they can. I just urge us to work together on this. I understand the hurt and the anger that people have, the devastation out their front door, or even not being able to return to your home. That is heartbreaking, and this is just the biggest disaster I think this city has faced in a generation at least. But I'll note that the city has been hit by tornadoes before, and we have come back from them before. So I know that we can do this, but we've got to support each other. We've got to love each other. We've got to be focused on the singular goal that we have to succeed as a city, because it's not North, Central, or South City. It's one city. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one thing to add in your spirit of unity is, and I'll say this before taking this off, because I never would think I'd be able to say this, but our federal partners and our governor, we can disagree on multiple areas, whether it be policing, whether it be on taxes, a lot of number of things that I can tell you. I know Spencer has said it, and I'll say it too, that we disagree on. But the governor and his administration, I make it clear to the public, has actually been a huge advocate in this effort. As we look at everything from the initial FEMA request to the president and aspects of the governor's office, his office, as well as our two state senators, Hawley and Schmidt, which I would have been surprised about too, and Bell, have all been extreme advocates on the federal level. They have been operating as one state and one city, and I just want to make sure that we acknowledge that core effort from that team. They also do not have the background and resources to lead a major USACE mission, and they have all supported letters of request and support and have been calling on the broader administration for support. And so I just wanted to put that on the record, just to give people assurance that this is not a state versus the city. This is the federal government who is failing the community right now, and we have the full state support.
Alderwoman Tanya.
Just want to echo all of the gratitude that's been sent out. Don't want to take too much time on things that have been here because we've been here for so long. I just did have a question. I know there's a lot of conversation going on with the school district. I know they've really reported that in the impacted tornado areas, their enrollment in, as far as attendance in many cases has been cut in half. Can you tell us about any conversations you're engaging with the school district, school officials, in efforts to help those families that are in our city and those schools that are still very much struggling?
Yeah, thank you for that. So this was actually a conversation me and Mayor Spencer were just having earlier today. One is we're directly making sure we're engaging the superintendent, Dr. Borishade, and that broader group in the recovery efforts. They've already started being integrated in conversations directly tied to neighborhood planning efforts, and we're also in active conversations about some of these numbers. The biggest question that we have as the city is really what, as we look at those students, have they transferred to other districts? Where are they? Are they not at school, to figure out where the city can partner with them to better support students? Those conversations are ongoing, so we don't have kind of any hard, direct partnerships that we're working through. But right now, we're trying to understand the data that they just published that said 40% of students decline in those areas, and trying to understand where those students went and how the city can help, especially for the students that we can get to return back to their schools.
Obviously, we have a lot of things to consider and to weigh, but one of the things that I hope that your office can collaborate with the school district on, if they're going to, have to make some tough decisions in regards to where schools are going to be and tornadoes are going to have impact, then I think it really makes sense for us as a city to figure out how we can support the schools that will be remaining in impacted areas with intensive wraparound service. I'm a huge advocate for community schools, which the city used to have and used to fund up until 2012. But I think, I would love to see us having those conversations. Folks mentioned, RAM settlement funds. We know that families are our fastest declining population of folks who are leaving the city. And so I really hope that we will engage with them as far as how the city can be an ongoing partner, as far as their efforts in helping those families to get some stabilization offers, stabilization efforts going. And then also I know I've seen some communication, I'm sure it's still very early on, but also talking about using some of those schools that will still be there as potential spaces for health resources and health equity. I know that's been a conversation that the school district is actually having on their own as they talk about downsizing. So again, might be another collaboration opportunity there between Human Services, Department of Health, and Office of Recovery. So just wanted to uplift that. And then this is actually my last question for the sake of time, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about vacant turnovers and what that looks like and who's being talked to, and if community development corporations are being involved in those conversations.
Yeah, so thank you. So I'll comment on two. So one, to your point around St. Louis Public Schools, that's the direct reason for bringing them into neighborhood engagements. One of the first things we realized when we were doing planning is there was no one present from SLPS, and we know that cities and neighborhoods exist around community institutions within health, and it includes schools. And so the direct part of your question as we look at where they think about schools, you have to have that as a part of neighborhood planning and where that is. And so that was the reason for that being an early integration of the partnership. And so we are working directly on that with them and look forward to continuing to collaborate with them as we look at that moving forward. And to your next question, sorry, can you repeat your second one?
Vacant turnovers, just a little bit more detail for folks who might not be sure. I know that that means basically the activation of housing that used to be vacant, but if you could explain what that is and who you might be partnering with, and specifically I'm interested in if that includes any community development corporations, because I know that's something that has been a huge financial burden for a lot of them, is figuring out how to activate a network.
Yep, so it's both, so the initial tranche is public housing, so traditional public housing places that have vacant units. And then the other is, I did talk about nonprofits. I didn't say CDCs. A lot of people don't know what those are, but community development corporations I'm talking about. Talk to nonprofits. Right now, we are collecting the full list of properties that are vacant. And as we learn more about what those are, what it costs to bring them, we'll continue to partner with both the public housing and those groups. I think we've so far identified about 500 total units of housing, and I believe we're right now focusing on moving about 200 of those forward over the course. Next ENA, there will actually be several vacant units that'll be a part of that, and we'll continue to do those as we learn more and as we verify the needs and the feasibility of bringing those properties online.
Thank you. And my last question, actually, do you have any idea when we can give more? A lot of the questions last hearing and this hearing have been around this idea of a housing plan. Do you have any idea when we might, I know we just started these advisory boards. Do you have any idea when we might be at a point where we'll have more information available to the public about just more details on a housing plan, both intermediate and long term?
Yeah. So we'll kind of come back on that. I think right now our immediate focus is we know the number of households in FEMA data that are labeled in inaccessible kind of places or homes that were damaged during the storm, and trying to understand that need. Right now, quite frankly, the biggest focus is bringing as much the plan is bringing as much housing online as we can to move families into. So there's not like this integrated plan. We know there's about 4,200 households who had a habitability status of their home as inhabitable. And so the biggest focus is figuring out how we triage the repair program to get the ones that can be back online and safe by winter online. And it is to open up as much affordable housing as possible. And then it is to open up broader kind of shelter operations for the additional population that may not have access to housing by winter. So the reality of my team is we are extremely focused on the execution of bringing housing online in alignment, and then making sure we're meeting the gaps where rental assistance and things are a problem in the short term. And we'll continue to bring things through from a funding perspective as we learn how we can do that better.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Thank you, Chairman. First, who sitting here tonight, you spent part of your evening here. Thank you for sharing your testimony and your stories. I know for some of you that wasn't easy to do, so I just want to say thank you for doing that. And thank you for being here and continuing to hold us accountable. Julian, I think these questions are mostly for you and your team. and I'll try and keep it short. But I think how do these plans and these community groups, because what I keep hearing from, I think last meeting and today is people are asking, what is the plan? It seems like you have a plan. And I think based on what people have been through, knowing that what that looks like and what the timeline is for guidance and what we're going to do, it sounds like that's what people are asking for. And I know you're building and flying the plane, if you will, at the same time, so it's hard to plan something while you're trying to assess it. But I'm curious about how these advisory committees, as well as the consultant group that SLDC just approved, I mean, some of those are infrastructure, housing plans, and how do we make sure that community is centered in those plans, and how are those plans integrated, and when will people have an idea of when they're coming?
Yeah. So that was kind of one of the things that we talked about. So we just got the recovery office 2 or 3 weeks ago, directly kind of through ENA. My team is now fully hired into all of those respective positions effective on Monday. And so as we look at the broader kind of neighborhood efforts, I think you saw at the back part is that we'll start to have formalized meetings in the community that'll be regular updates to provide more access to that directly within the community. So that will be one source of how we'll deliver kind of broader, better updates. We are in the process of developing better partnerships with a lot of neighborhood associations as well. So that's kind of the next phase to help make sure that at least the groups who are very present on the ground kind of have those direct aspect of operations. But I think our hope is that by being present more in the community, being at neighborhood and setting up regular meetings in the community, we'll be able to inform the public regularly in those areas, and hopefully a place that's much more easy to get to around what's happening, as well as investing more in how we get and distribute information live as it goes. I think the reality for a lot of aspects of the recovery, the deadlines or the sense of this hard deadline just isn't kind of a realistic view of kind of where we are within it. What we are trying to do is at least bound the goals and the initiatives that are going to be happening over the next 6 months, what's happening over the next year, to at least help people understand when they can expect to do different pieces of work. We're currently finalizing a lot of that on both the debris side as well as some of the early housing side as we look at the priorities, and we'll share those with the public and groups more broadly as soon as those are finalized.
I think my question too is, so I've been looking at Paradise, California. They were that fire. They lost basically all their infrastructure, 40% of their people. And they've had a long-term recovery plan. It took them 18 months to build that. They centered community. They centered values around the community centered its values, and then they were able to make a recovery and planning decision. So I'm curious about how, because at some point we'll have to prioritize, right? Yeah. So how are we prioritizing? Who's determining what we prioritize? And community would be a big part of determining what we do and in what order first.
Yeah. Yes, no, that's exactly right. So a few ways, and sorry, I did your question to start. So a few ways is, one, when we look at the committees that we set up, the goal is for the resident community advisory committee to help drive or influence the priorities, and the civic leaders to be really a group that helps mobilize around that broader plan. The way that'll look like is that committee, but more importantly, meetings and things in town halls with groups on the ground will be what informs kind of what the priorities are for that region alongside the neighborhood planning, and that'll drive the focus areas of investment. So the goal is between the Resident Community Advisory Committee and the work that they'll deploy, combined with meetings on the ground, will help set the priorities, and then will help develop the plans in alignment with those priorities.
I will say, I want to echo what Alderwoman Sonier said in bringing up the schools, and thank you for uplifting that. I mean, it's easy for me to say because you're in the middle of it. We're in a situation that's broader than the city, right? And so for us to have a long recovery, economic, development, schools, everything ties into each other. It's interdependent. So, my other question is, we've heard a lot of talk about what the city is going to contribute. And we're looking at neighborhood plans, and yes, absolutely, we need to look at the impacted areas. And for long-term recovery, it has to be a one St. Louis. I mean, not to echo, we're the same city. Well, you don't have to take that saying, because I know that comes with other things. But so what is the thought process on making sure that other areas of the city are engaged or understanding the process, so that they know that we don't move forward as a St. Louis doesn't move forward unless we all move forward. And that's the reality. But how is that part of it? Because that was an interesting thing. And Paradise is a much, much smaller city. But if you center it around community, and everybody's involved, then everybody, you get, I'm simplifying it here, but you get buy-in, and everybody realizes that no matter if you're north or south, that we need to make sure that North City recovers.
Yeah. So I think one of them is making sure we're better at the story of what happened in North St. Louis. What I've been shocked by is going into other wards and things who still don't fully understand the damage and devastation that hit North St. Louis. So one, I think there's a broader aspect of actually making sure that story is loud and clear. I think the second is we're going to rely on our alders in the other areas to recognize and share those stories as well. My office stands ready if there are alders who are hosting town halls in the community, who are prioritizing investment in North St. Louis, whether that be funds that have already happened or funds to allocate. Our office will be happy to come and talk about the damage that's being done, the plans that are ahead, and help make that a reality for those groups to be understanding for why trash may be a little bit slower and other things might be a little bit slower in those communities as we focus our efforts in this area. And so we stand ready both to receive ideas from the rest of the Board of Alders who oversee districts that weren't as impacted by the tornado, and working with you all to help figure out how we integrate the rest of the city more in this recovery vision.
Is there any way you can speak a little closer to the mic? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. No more questions for me.
Alderman Devotie.
Julian, Jim, and Adam, thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate the information you've provided and your willingness to answer questions. To the folks that came tonight and told us your stories, it's the kind of thing, though painful and disturbing and things that you don't want to relive, it's absolutely necessary. I'm one of those South Side alders, one of the guys that represents an area that is not or has not been affected by this. The reality is there is a tremendous amount of insulation. The folks in my neighborhoods don't truly understand what you're going through. I'm admitting that to you. But I can also say, and Julian just referenced it, that at every neighborhood meeting I go to and every town hall that I host, the first topic of conversation is North St. Louis. It's our North Side neighbors. And that's the terminology that we use, neighbors, meaning we are in this together. I'm next at a neighborhood meeting next Wednesday. I promise you that your experiences and what you've said here will lead off that meeting just like what I heard a month ago led off the first meeting I talked after that. Now, Julian, having said that, I know that one of the things that struck me tonight, having woken up on a morning in the mid-50s for the first time this year, was if I was in these folks' situation, I'd be thinking of home stabilization, repair, some type of housing if I have made it through this summer. And what the heck am I going to do as we hit the mid-50s, moving into 30s, and eventually those nights that we have frost on the ground. So tell me, from a mechanical standpoint, and we've heard the plan and we've heard the 10,000-foot view, but mechanically, if I'm one of these folks and I'm in this situation tonight, what am I doing moving forward to secure a stable home, much needed repairs, and this housing that's going to get me through the winter of 25, 26?
Yep. So I think it kind of depends heavily on talking about, but I'll talk about what that means mechanically for the city. Is one of them, we talked about the resource hub, the disaster case management that can make sure we're pairing individuals directly with case managers who can help people find solutions. I think from a city standpoint, mechanically, what we are doing and what we will be doing is first we have to actually get a true understanding of the need. People have moved, people have been transient, and the help didn't come fast enough from FEMA that many people aren't where they typically say they are. So one of them is going to be a very rapid getting a sense of where people still are and what the outstanding housing needs are. The reality for many folks is if you have substantial damage to your structure, whether it is a roof or a missing wall, that will not be fixed by winter. So the reality is we have to identify those households. We have to make sure, did they apply to FEMA? Did they get rental assistance? If they don't have rental assistance, do they not qualify, or do we need to get that activated? And if they don't, because for everything they fall through a loophole, it's building out a program that gives some other form of rental assistance or met needs for that person. And then it is ultimately matching and pairing them with housing. That is going to be a one-on-one family situation. Some are already looking for homes. But from a city perspective, it's understanding that need and trying to figure out how we bring much of that housing online and then matching the supply we create with the demand live as it comes through.
So you've got a number of community leaders tonight. You've got folks that live in these neighborhoods. If you had their ear, and I think you do have their ear, what is the direction to them to tell their neighbors, their community members, the folks in their churches, this is what you need to do to get the assistance that is available to you? What's the direction?
Yeah, so I think number one, there's a lot of people who are still in their damaged dwellings that want to stay and can't. They can't and they shouldn't. It's not safe. For some of those are individuals who are eligible for rental assistance, they're eligible for relocation, but are having trouble, and rightfully so, letting go of that. I think from a community perspective, we have to have some of those conversations with those neighbors and ultimately get them to, one, apply for that broader rental assistance and start to wrap their heads around relocating. And then from a city perspective, we have to enable that process when the people are ready to make that transition, at least until we can have a longer term plan that can help ultimately restore or help them make fundamental decisions about repairs and rebuilding.
You started this presentation mentioning that we're here specifically to talk about the RAMS money, but you also want to talk about the other potential sources of assistance that can help these folks. You made mention of $100 million of disaster relief funds from the state of Missouri. Can you educate us about to what extent those funds are available to us in the city? In other words, how are they? Have they been distributed, and are they accessible to us?
They are not accessible yet. Those are funds that's been allocated within the state. That $100 million is dedicated to the city. But where it goes and where it's authorized is ultimately up to the state and Department of Public Safety in collaboration. And as I said, we have made it very clear that the top priorities from us as an administration is both the massive debris removal efforts required to make these communities safe and livable, and then it is also housing. And so we are still in ongoing conversations around how they'll move that funding through, and had even current mayor, I know the mayor was on the phone talking directly to the governor today about those two exact problems.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate all of you being here.
President Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I first really want to thank all the community members that came out tonight and shared your testimony. A lot of it was, quite frankly, very difficult to hear and also very necessary, not just for those of us at the Board of Aldermen, but for the broader public to keep the North Side centered and at front of mind. Because as both Alderman Devotee said and Julian said, unfortunately, the perceptions of recovery and the perceptions of what is happening on the North Side are very different depending upon where you live in the city. And I think it's paramount on all of us to make sure that the tornado and the long-term recovery stay front and center. Other thing I want to make mention of is when we introduced the $30 million back in, I think it was May actually, or early June, we were very clear then that this would be the beginning, not the end. And I stay true in that commitment today. And I know that as we come back into session at the Board of Aldermen. I'm committed. I know many members of the Board of Aldermen are committed. I know the mayor's office is committed to, having those critical conversations that we need to have to figure out, what funding and resources look like for long-term recovery, and recognizing that we either all soar or we all fall as a city. And so the investment in the north side really has to be our North Star if we want the entirety of the city to succeed. And that was true before the tornado, and it's even more important now. Also just want to provide a little bit more information about E&A meetings. So E&A, the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, which is myself, the mayor, and the comptroller, we have committed to having special E&A meetings focused just on tornado recovery contracts every other week through at least January. And we're doing that, to make sure that we are having meetings that are putting tornado recovery front and center, but also to make sure that we can move contracts at a faster pace than we typically would if we were waiting for our monthly E&A meeting. And for members of the public, if you are curious, you want to see the individual contracts, we have been putting those in the RAM settlement portal, those E&A documents, so you can access them there, or you can access them on the city website for the Board of Estimate and Apportionment as well, because we do want to make sure that we're being transparent as we are bringing up these contracts for approval. As Alderman Browning said, our procurement process is unnecessarily slow. It is another effort that we were working on updating prior to the tornado, and we'll have updated efforts to address this fall. Some of that is legislation, some of it is charter changes. And charter changes unfortunately take a little longer because we have to send them to the ballot. But that is a priority that we are working on. The other information I am working on, I think this is more for Director Pearson, but the Airbnb fee that we passed, or that voters passed in November, is still in effect even though the regulations were struck down in court. Do you happen to know what that has been generating, as that fund is supposed to go toward right to counsel, impacted tenants, and affordable housing?
Thank you, Madam President. I do not know how much that has been generating. I would love to have some information.
Okay, let me see if I can get that from the license collector, and collectively, hopefully we can start to see the amount of funding that's generating, because that might be some additional resources. And then the last thing I'll say is, I absolutely hear you, members of the community, when it comes to concerns about predatory property buy-ups. I just shared with my staff, I got a postcard sent to my house a little bit ago that was one of those. Was your home impacted by the tornado? We want to buy it as is, all cash, we'll close in a week. Those types of scams are prevalent. And so my office is looking into what we can do within the confines of state law to regulate those types of behaviors, and also limit those types of predatory folks from being able to purchase property and then, unfortunately hold it, is what we often see for long periods of time, and just cause further deterioration of neighborhoods. So that is something that is top of mind. I don't have a solution to it today, unfortunately, but it is something that we are researching and actively working on, as we know that is becoming more and more of an issue, and will continue to become more and more of an issue as some of these predatory companies see St. Louis as a place for them to kind of get their claws in. So with that, I just want to thank Julian and his team for being here today, and for the public for sharing all of your testimony with us today. And if there are feedback, other information that you would like to see from these hearings, do not hesitate to reach out to myself or my office. We're in constant communication with Julian and his team to make sure that we're getting the type of information out that the public wants to see. And so I'm committed every meeting to take that feedback and work with the recovery office to make sure that we're making these meetings meaningful and giving the information and getting the feedback necessary so that we can move forward together as a community to recover. So thank you so much for your time tonight, and thank you to members of the community for being here, and members of the committee for your thoughtfulness this evening.
Thank you, Madam President. I just have a few, and then we will adjourn so everyone can get home and rest up a little bit. Also, I want to thank again the public for coming out. You could be doing anything else, but being here, speaking direct truth to power, people who have the ability to get some more of that Rams money out the door are right here. So, thank you for those personal testimonies. One of the things that Alderman Browning, brought up is when this tornado happened on May 16th, the city was not prepared to handle a devastation. And clearly we are still trying to walk and chew gum and figure that out. At the same time, you had the federal government under the Orange Man that was pulling, the rug under FEMA as they were literally out in the streets. One minute they was told they could knock doors, and then next minute they told they couldn't do that. We tried to get the extension. Other cities had devastations to get extended, and they wouldn't do that. And then on top of it, we have a state government that, we allocated the $100 million. I will say it was interesting when our representatives went up for that. It was also in line for making sure that the Kansas City Chiefs were to stay. And now we are in a position where they are at another special session trying to dilute Black power in Kansas City and take away the initiative petition process, and haven't even spent or haven't told the city that $100 million that was passed, where those funds are going. And all that to be, said is that we wasn't ready for this devastation. And I also say that even though this tornado hit Northside, I think I continue to say, before this tornado hit, Northside was already going through a devastation. It was already going through the lack of investment, the lack of development, the lack of economic wealth being poured over into the 10th Ward, the 11th Ward, the 12th Ward, and part of the 14th Ward in College Hill. So this tornado only just made, I think, a situation that was already on life support even worse. And as we're not clear what's going to happen federally, we're not clear what's going to happen on the state level, there is an opportunity here locally to continue to tap into more money from the Rams settlement to move the needle forward. Now, no, we're talking about a $1 billion devastation. So if the Board of Aldermen was to spend all of that 200, we still talking about, not good at math, but yeah, I do the billion and 200. It's still a lot that we have to figure out. One of the questions I do have for you, Julian, and just like the president, I know, I'm committed. I think I said it publicly. I do think we need to use more of it. I know the president have said that. Has there been conversations amongst the recovery office and the mayor on exploring the idea of spending more of the Rams money in the impacted areas that have been devastated by the tornado?
I can confirm there have been conversations. Those conversations continue to be ongoing as we figure out what the finances of the recovery and core priorities will take, and that continues to be a priority. We know, and the mayor has said, that we expect a significant chunk of the Rams to go toward Northside and Northside investment. How much will be an ongoing discussion with the president's office and the entire board of aldermen.
Gotcha. I think Alderwoman Velasco has alluded to a little earlier with SLDC. There was an article, I think, of $1 million of an outside company that's going to be doing work, around the tornado. Can you maybe talk about that? I know SLDC isn't necessarily the mayor's office, but it is around tornado recovery, what that entails. We're months after the tornado, and this firm just got $1 million to do tornado recovery work. Could you speak on what that expenditure is, and was that from RAMS, or is that a different pot of money?
That's a different pot of money that sits within SLDC. That is not RAMS dollars. We have been in consistent conversation with SLDC. The main one is to prioritize the aspect of recovery from an SLDC perspective. So naturally, SLDC oversees a lot of the business and economic recovery. SLDC also owns a lot of property in the north side, including LRA, and SLDC also has the power to do a lot of the aspects around economic incentives that can help support rebuilding. The goal of the consulting firm is to help coordinate those efforts within SLDC. So similar to how the city has a lot more work to do directly tied to the recovery and created a recovery office and bringing in external support to help us in core areas, this is SLDC bringing that support in more core areas. So we'll be continuing to coordinate with them over the weeks to directly define that scope. It will directly and heavily interact with our office around those broader sets of efforts as we look and move forward.
Gotcha. Early on during the budget process, we did, this committee passed an amendment for $1 million at the time. It was from reserves to go to Impact Attendance Fund, and there were conversations that between myself and the mayor's office and the president that instead of using those from reserves from that $1 million, that money would come from RAMS when they Impact Attendance Fund. So if not an answer today, it would be interesting to know where that kind of commitment stood. I know we're getting close to, I think, the last 12 that may be coming out. So if not on this round, when we come back around on the next round of RAMS fund, and I don't want to wait, but I do know that there's a little bit of pot of money for Impact Attendance Fund that may be able to hold over from DHS. But we're gonna want the whole $1 million when or figure out where that kind of commitment is from that $1 million that was supposed to go to Impact Attendance Fund. Would be helpful to get that information.
Okay, we'll circle back, but what I'll tell you is we think there's dollars that need to go everywhere, including directly toward Impact Attendance, so we welcome continued conversation around that and additional funding tied to this recovery effort.
Gotcha. Last question, debris removal. The Army of Engineer Corps.
U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah. Could you give maybe an update on, I think they're expected to kind of be a help with the debris removal. Is there any movement of them coming in to help with the debris removal? And then I have a part 2 question.
I will say you all know as much as we know, which is we submitted the FEMA request for USACE approval a long time ago, and we are awaiting. It is simply awaiting on the president. It's in the federal government in DC waiting for them to authorize that overall mission. And so we welcome the public to continue to demand and request an answer from our federal government, but we don't have one. We've not received any communication, no sign of when and if that support will come. And that's why we're still focused on moving forward as much we can with the city on a plan B for if we're left to do this alone. The only saving grace that we have is at least we got the private property debris removal approved, so at least we can get reimbursement if we do have to go with Plan B. But we're moving fully along, on pace with our Plan B option if the real value of USACE does not come in. And what I will say is that does slow and change the length of time to removing debris to roughly double the time of what it would take for us to do it than what it would take if we have USACE support. So we're going to continue to advocate for USACE support, but we're not going to depend on it.
I was going to ask about the Plan B, but it sounds like earlier we said, we're all one team. The federal government has been great. Josh and
I said our state and federal reps. I both
Well, our state and federal reps have been great, but I hope they're picking up the phone call now. You know, once it's hot and sexy for to stand in front of a camera, Josh Hawley, and, you know, talk about, I'm going to make sure we get this declaration. You know, now we're months out. I hope they still picking up the phone to.
They are still, I know Casey Milberg, our chief of staff, and the mayor Spencer directly are in regular coordination with the governor's office and the senator's office and Wesley Bell's office. And those conversations are multiple times a week.
Gotcha. And if we don't get them, I think you said you guys will still move. I think the price tag for that debris move, was it roughly like 700?
Yes. That
million?
is the use-oriented mission. We don't know fully what the actual realized cost will be. And so a lot of that we'll learn more as we move kind of the broader efforts from a city perspective around those costs. We do know use costs more, but we also know speed is a cost, right? So we do know that and right now the city doesn't do this a lot, right? And so till we can bid out the work and do it, we don't really know how much it costs. So we know the price tag from USACE is $700 million. We have heard that the price for us might be closer to $450, but we also know a year longer to remove debris is population decline, is lack of economic investment, which has way more costs than what the additional cost of USACE support is. And so that's why our focus is there, and we'll learn more about the cost for the city as we move through.
And I promise for my members, my last question, and because I think it's just important for the record, I know there's been a lot of conversation around the Spirit. I have been doing some research. I think the contract had ended maybe around August 31st, and then they clearly looked at the assessment and said, this is way more than what we needed to. So just to be clear, do you know if they ended early, or was it that the contract was over and then they?
We jointly terminated the agreement when we cannot negotiate. They wanted us to go up on price. That was much higher than what was initially bid upon. And so we mutually agreed that they would close out the work on the temporary debris sites, and that we would rebid the work out to another contractor because they were not going to perform the duties upon the contract.
Okay, thank you. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. Look forward to getting that 24 hours presentation.
24 hours. I'm surprised you didn't say 48 or 72.
You know, I would go with 24. You know, anything's better than 2 to 3, 4 hours beforehand.
Just for you, Aldridge.
I look forward, Mr. Nix. Thank you, guys. Any last questions, comment from the committee members? Seeing none. Again, I do want to echo and just thank the community for being and coming out. We will, as soon as we get another date locked down for the next hearing, that will be at 6 o'clock so that community can be here. It will be publicized as soon as possible so that I know organizers that are doing the work can also get the word out. So thank everybody for coming. I was about to say Alderwoman. Madam Clerk, do we have any acknowledgement of written testimony?
We have none.
Any announcements from any committee members? Seeing none, I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, aye? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.